It's Amy Marchkors and Chris Ranji on KMOX. And at the southern border, which has been a topic of conversation for years, the immigration system, well, it's not particularly good. And what has happened in Texas over the last, I guess I would say several weeks has been of note. And to talk about that with us, we go to the Quiver River Electric guest line. Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, who is the owner and CEO of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law, specializes in immigration, is with us this afternoon on KMOX. Kate, thank you for being with us.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on.
Well, the latest controversy that's happened is these, I guess they're called buoys. That's what's been happening along the river along the Rio Grande. Border Patrol has said they don't particularly like it, or at least that's what we hear, because it makes their jobs more difficult. It's causing a humanitarian issue to some experts because they are considered to be dangerous. What exactly is going on there, and how bad is the situation?
It's pretty egregious. I've not seen anything like this really probably since maybe family separations in 2018. But, this is not a federal policy. This is the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, spending Texas taxpayer money to install razor wire in these giant floating buoys that themselves are covered in wire and also have netting below them, so that if a migrant were to swim underneath, they would, get caught in the netting. And so there have already been many reports of injuries and deaths. And so they're, essentially what they are is drowning devices that are floating in the middle of the river at a time when border crossings are at a record low. And in fact, the last 2 years of any of, Abbott's activities along the border, under which he calls Operation Lone Star, have had a, less than 1% impact on the border apprehension. So all of this is being done, and it's actually not even making a dent in a problem that doesn't actually exist. So really, at the end of the day, what's happening is the governor of Texas is spending $10 billion of Texas taxpayer money wreaking havoc for a problem that is not his to fix, and some would argue doesn't even exist.
Well, we do know that there is a humanitarian crisis at the border. This is not speaking to the buoys or the different tactics that have come to light recently, but just over the past really 2 years, the number of migrants crossing the border illegally, those numbers were historically high, hundreds of thousands, and it was setting records each month. And it's a heartbreaking issue because the Border Patrol is overwhelmed, and you have people trying to escape horrific conditions, but then are finding that they're escaping to a place that's ill-prepared to take them in. So we know that it is a crisis, and it's not that nationally we have bad policy, it's we have no policy. It feels chaotic, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, going back multiple administrations. So I guess I would say, can you define what you mean by there being a problem or not being a problem, when we know that over the past couple of years it's been historic numbers and just overwhelming the system at that point?
Sure, there's so much to say about it. I've been a border lawyer in Texas for 15 years. So I've weathered many administrations and seen a lot. And what I will say is that pre-COVID, we had a functioning system where an asylum seeker could come, they could walk themselves up to the bridge and speak to a Border Patrol officer and say, I've been persecuted, or I'm afraid of returning to my country. And they'd go through this period where they'd be screened for asylum, they'd be detained, and if they didn't pass, they'd be sent home. And there were ebbs and flows, related to seasons and things going on in certain countries, like is there an uprising in Cuba, or is there an earthquake in Haiti? Things would happen that would temporarily impact the numbers, and we weathered them. And then what happened was, during the Trump administration, a series of policies finally ending in Title 42 essentially shut down the border completely to asylum seekers. So there was no way for someone who had a viable asylum case to come to the border and seek help. So they started gathering, in these homeless sort of migrant camps along the southern border and left with, some only alternative to cross and be apprehended and get sent back. So that artificially inflated the number. So it looked like, oh my gosh, we have all these border crossings, when in fact what we have is the same group of, numbers of people who just don't have a chance to apply for asylum. There isn't an orderly way. So in May, Title 42 was lifted. We had 3 years of people who hadn't gotten a chance to apply, finally hoping for their opportunity. And now in July, what we have is a bit of a settling out of that peak that occurred as a result of the Title 42 policy. So when I say we don't have a problem, what I mean is we don't have a porous border. Our Department of Homeland Security budget is $100 billion. And we have the border handled. Texas doesn't need to handle the border. Now, do we need to also look at our asylum policies and get back to that orderly processing system that we had in place before? Yes. But what we don't need is Greg Abbott coming in and messing around with things and causing more problems. That has now drawn the ire of the Mexican government and the U.S. government. Everybody's threatening to sue Greg Abbott right now because of what he's doing.
I'm looking at the numbers from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They are reporting that the numbers of people trying to illegally cross are under 100,000, which was between February and June of 2023. So going back to February of 2021, I think I said January, that the numbers are back to that point. Is that accurate?
Well, they're at a record low as compared to the previous years. But remember, like I said, these numbers are, I don't particularly rely on these numbers because here's an example. If you have a family of 5 people, they're from Honduras, let's say, and they get to the border and they can't ask for asylum and they're camped out. And let's say they get subjected to kidnapping, and they get released on ransom. And what options do they have? So they're going to cross the river. They get apprehended. They get sent back immediately to Mexico. They're going to come back tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day until they have some type of resolution. So these repeat apprehensions artificially inflate the numbers. But now what we're seeing along the border, we still have some of that repeat. I mean, there's so much that's happening. We have some repeat apprehensions, but there's now this app, this way that people can register and apply. So some people are able to apply for asylum. Some people are being bused by Mexico back into the interior of the country. So it is super chaotic. There is a lot going on. But from a big picture perspective, the reality is that CBP and the Department of Homeland Security, they have our border managed. It's really easy for Republican governors and conservative politicians to scare people and say like, oh, drug traffickers, human traffickers, danger, criminals are flooding over the border. But that is not the reality. It's just that is a powerful statement that gets people to act because they're afraid.
Yeah, and I know the numbers can be confusing, especially with COVID, in the same way like when we've looked at crime and people can say, well, crime is down from 2020, but 2020 was historically high in St. Louis. And so when we're looking at the border and you're looking at the flood of migrants coming to the border, 2020, Title 42, and how that kind of messed up all the numbers, there's also the idea of apprehensions versus gotaways and people sneaking past the border. There was a story in the Washington Post kind of breaking that down. What is our number of those that got away versus without being identified versus those who were apprehended?
Yeah, I mean, and you hear different numbers of the gotaways, which I always think is really interesting when I hear people reporting on the gotaways, because that's a negative reflection on the agency when you talk about that. But here's ultimately what needs to happen when we talk about, okay, we've got more people along the southern border wanting to come into this country than we have processing for right now. So what is the solution? Well, it's a 2-part solution. Number one, we screen people quickly for asylum and determine whether or not they qualify, and give them a chance to come and apply for asylum, I'm putting this in quotes, the right way, so that there is a way to do that. We haven't done that until recently for 3 years. So it created a lot of chaos. Number two, we need to open up our eyes to the reality that this economy of the United States has a need for immigrant labor on all sides of the skill spectrum, low skilled up to high skilled. Our population is aging. We have a desperate need for workers, and we have jobs for them. And yet our laws don't reflect this need. And so if we could get immigration reform or Congress to pass some type of immigration law that would reflect the needs of the economy, and we provide an orderly way to process asylum seekers, we wouldn't see so many border apprehensions, because there wouldn't be that's not the only choice that we're leaving people with.
What was the situation with, and I guess there was some discrepancy about whether or not it was ordered by anybody. It was ordered by the governor to push people back into the river as they were trying to cross into Texas. What exactly was the situation there?
There was a whistleblower, a couple of agents, state troopers, I think they were, who wrote a letter saying, we've crossed the line into the inhumane. And in their letter, they said, they detailed, we were told to push a mother with a nursing infant back into the water. We pushed a 4-year-old girl back into Mexico, and she later passed out from heat exhaustion. We were told not to provide water to the migrants. We saw a woman who was pregnant and entangled in the razor wire in the water, miscarrying. We saw a 15-year-old boy with his leg broken, caught in the razor wire. That is what they're detailing, that they were told. The state of Texas has come back and said, no, we did not order them to say these things. But, there's lots of images. There's lots of reporters going down there. It's easy to see the impact of razor wire and buoys covered in nets is drowning and destruction and injury. That is a necessary, it's of course that will be the result of these devices.
Immigration lawyer Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch with us on KMOX. We appreciate your time and the information, Kate. Thank you.